Welcome to the Directions Mag Geoinspirations podcast series with Joseph Kerski.
Well, greetings, folks. Joseph Kerski here from the ESRI Education Industry Team. I'm here with someone that I admire quite a bit, and I just recently saw him at the GIS in the Rockies conference, David Hansen from GeoJobe. David, greetings.
Well, greetings to you as well, Dr. Kerski. I admire you as well and a lot of your work. I followed you for a while, and I really appreciate the things you're doing for the geospatial industry and education and outreach. So it's an honor to be here talking with you.
Well, thanks for your time. I know how busy you are, and it's much appreciated, and I think will be appreciated by those tapping into this recording. David, here's one of the things that I was wondering about. You know, as we try to encourage folks coming into geospatial from a wide variety of backgrounds, and we're starting to see that in geospatial, could you describe how you got into this field and perhaps any key moments? You know, we have these sort of nudge moments in our career. Any moments that stand out along your journey?
So I was fortunate enough to be introduced to GIS in high school. There was a program which took place there. I've been studying GIS since I was 15 years old. And at that time period, it was in the early 2000s with the 3X series. So I'm probably one of the youngest people that is certified on the 3X series. And I'm a certified Avenue developer, which that'll kind of date my level of knowledge there. And I was fortunate enough to be coming into it when the paradigm shift took place, moving over to geodatabases in the 8 series. So when I was 15 years old, in the summer I turned 16, I interned at a local government, and I did the city of Gulfport, Mississippi, where I live. We're the second largest city in Mississippi. And I went and converted a lot of their information over from shapefiles to geodatabases and helped develop some of the schemas and do a lot of work there, some addressing work where I determined where address points were for their planning department. It was real interesting possessing those skills at a young age that adults were looking up to as it being something where, you can bring something to the table. After that, I went into working at utilities for a short while for some power cooperatives as nonprofits. Then I worked for a nonprofit doing economic development and some policy analysis that was involved after Hurricane Katrina with housing and population returns, that kind of stuff. And then I went back to the city of Gulfport, and then I went back to the Southern Mississippi Planning Development District. So I had a kind of a back and forth there. And then I started at GeoJobe. And I've been at GeoJobe for quite a while now. I want to say that I'm coming up on my 8th year in GeoJobe here. And GeoJobe didn't really focus on kind of products or software development as much. And we kind of had a local perspective that was focused to the southeastern United States. And when I came into GeoJobe, I came in during a paradigm shift there as well, where we were shifting over to a more national perspective. And then with some of the things that I developed down in the Mississippi area, because I'm at the Mississippi Gulf Coast and I'm the director of our Center for Research and Engineering, which I founded. That's where we developed admin tools and Clean My Org and a lot of the products that kind of went global using the ArcGIS marketplace. And once again, great timing, paradigm shift was taking place because that's when Esri was introducing ArcGIS Online, which I'm sure we'll talk about a good bit. I have some strong opinions there. And then we developed the administrative tools or an administrative tool set to make it easier for a lot of end users of ArcGIS Online, particularly, schools, large mega corporations, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my pathway on there. Some of my nudge moments, I'd have to say, is whenever I became a really good technician, they said, great, become an analyst. And the thing about that is the skill set that's involved in being an analyst is completely different than the skill sets involved in being a technician. I became a really great analyst. They said, great, how about you start managing these databases, which was a completely different skill set. So it's a story of change. And then it became great. Well, you do all this, and this great thing called Flex is out there. And we had Flex and Silverlight at the time. It's like, learn to be a front-end developer. These are skill sets again. And then Flex, of course, takes the hard death, and then it becomes, hey, become a JavaScript developer. And then after that, it becomes, hey, you built this great application with you and, one of your buddies down in Gulfport, Mississippi, and it's taken off and everyone's using it and everything. How about you move into product management and start managing timelines and then start managing a dev team? And then I became vice president of software development. And now I'm the chief operating officer for the company. And it's this constant growth, constant shifting, constant change. And I know when I spoke in Denver at GIS in the Rockies, that may have been some of that message that that may have resonated with the audience, is this constant growth and this constant change. And really, the story of GIS is the story of growth and the story of change. This transition I talked about, getting into it when I was 15 years old with the 3-2 series and learning just technician based proficiencies, and then kind of progressing all the way forward to like being an executive in a technology company and taking all of those steps on that staircase all the way up. That's part of it. That journey is really pivotal and really core to what goes on in the geospatial industry. So that's some of my hot air being blown out there. But what do you think there, Joseph?
Oh, I love it. Before I return to some of these key points that you're raising, which I think are really pertinent and interesting, what's it like? What is your day-to-day
Chief Operating
task?
Officer. Neil Jobe
Chief
is our
Operating.
founder. He's our
Okay.
Chief Executive Officer.
Gotcha.
So,
And I've known Neil for a long time. Yes, super guy.
Super great guy. So that's the thing. The CEO is about the philosophy and the vision of the company is what Neil's really doing there. And Neil really takes us in strong new directions. And some of the things like he was the one who took the leap to empower me to be able to do what I wanted to do with software development. He's the one who's taking the leap and leading with our UAV division and having that vision of the future, where the COO, I'm a lot of times the nuts and the bolts. I'm, budgets, bottom lines, price points, what's our go-to-market strategy? Are things in the engine room running well? So I'm more of Neil's the captain and I'm the head engineer is kind of where we are. So it's a great balance and a great relationship. And it takes different philosophies of life, and it takes being complementary to each other in areas that overlap, and then not necessarily being antagonistic, but having, differing primary objectives to get us there, right? So Neil sets the course, and then it's up to me to get us from point A to point B.
Being a person that serves in GIS and education, I love the fact that you are actually using GIS in high schools.
Yes.
Oftentimes we think, oh, we've been working on this, David, since 1992. So that is a long time to be hammering away, knocking on all the doors and tapping on all the windows with schools, administrators, superintendents, individual teachers, and wondering, and we occasionally get good stories, and we've seen personally the impact that this makes in a person's, not just their educational journey, but in their life. But it's just so great to hear about that you started. And when I was in high school, I was actually making paper maps on big poster boards. And in one of your presentations that I've seen, you showed some maps that you made when you were a younger person. I oftentimes show that too. I actually didn't have GIS when I was in high school, so it was all on, hand drawn. I had urban renewal districts. I even had address ranges on my maps. Super geeky. What teenager cares about or even knows about address ranges? So I think you and I can share some interesting early stories. But I always tell students, I'm sure you do as well, embrace maybe some things that you do that nobody else cares about. Run with those. Don't be afraid to be nerdy about or passionate about or enthusiastic about certain things, even if nobody else cares in your circle of friends.
I've seen some of your maps from back then, from your presentations. And if I recall, now your background was related in hotel and hospitality with your family. Is that correct, or am I misremembering?
Well, yes. My folks, my mom was a teacher as well, but my folks both, you don't think about this when you're a kid, but mid-career changing pathways. So bought a motel, moved us out to Colorado. My early, days were, I didn't have a front yard. I had a parking lot. Nice. And it was grand because I would meet people that would come and stay from all over the world, got to hear their stories, meet the people. Some of them came back every year and stayed at the same, lodging. And so that kind of sparked my love for, places and people. And it was a fascinating, actually, a really interesting childhood. And some folks on the listening to this, they might know of, maybe they've stayed at a place where you know that the people running the establishment actually live there as well in an apartment behind the office. That was what we had. We didn't have an off-site place. We actually lived right there. 4 kids, 2 folks, and it was a bit crowded, but wonderful experiences.
I have a similar background in a way. It was not necessarily a hotel, but the street I grew up on was my great grandparents, my grandparents, and then my family. It was a family street. And my grandparents kept veterans for the Veterans Administration, where if there's a veteran who necessarily doesn't need to be hospitalized but can't live on their own for an extended period of time, they do extended care there. So I grew up with the equivalent of a dozen different grandfathers at any given point, all with different stories that have been around the world and been different places. So that was pretty shaping as well, particularly being someone from the South Mississippi area, where a lot of times when people think about Mississippi, they don't think about technological innovation. They don't think about, growth or change or, forward-thinking progress. And as a matter of fact, even when I talk about the products that we develop and where they were developed and the background of the people that developed them, a lot of times people kind of raise an eyebrow when they hear that some of the most popular geospatial apps in the Esri ecosystem right now that are made by partners are developed in South Mississippi, that's where our Center for Research and Engineering is. And I think that some of that stigma is related to our education system and how it is. So it's also surprising a lot of times when you say, it's good to hear a high school student got exposed to GIS. Well, even more so in Mississippi. Like that's kind of a rarity of a rarity there, right? But I want to tell you something that I ran into in my own personal life that I think is a subject you care about as well, which is whenever I completed it at my high school education in GIS, 2 weeks later, I was working for the power company doing geospatial analysis and doing great things inside of that power company. And I go to college, like literally, it's 2 weeks after high school. I started college in a summer semester. I went and started working at the power company at the same time. Like that's what I was doing 2 weeks after high school. I show up and there's no cohesive curriculum to bring me from this primary education over into my education at the college level. So they want me to take all these intro classes and nothing related to GIS. And one of the geography instructors, not even one of the professors, one of the instructors is like, no, this kid's a certified geospatial technician. Can we put him in some of the classes for GIS? So they put me in the senior level 400 classes. I walk in, the adjunct instructor.
You're 17 years old.
Yeah, I hit 18 2 weeks before.
Okay, 18, yep.
Right there, just fresh 18. I walk in and the instructor looks at me, and it's the guy from the city of Gulfport that I worked at who was working with the data I developed. I quit working there 2 weeks before he showed up. He's like, "What are you doing in here?" I was like, "I'm taking your class." And he's like, "Just put your head down and don't say anything crazy." So I walk in this 400 level class, and then the problem is like in the first 2 years, I'm done with the curriculum at that university. I have to stick around another 2 years to finish off what's happening. All the same time while working in the industry, publishing papers and doing things. And if there was that joint curriculum between the primary education over into the, into college, then it would be more beneficial in this case. But a lot of times the colleges are very, very rigid. Like these are your freshman classes, these are your sophomore, these are your juniors, your senior. This is how this curriculum works. So one of the things that's happened at the university that I went to was I was kind of a flagship of the first that's coming out of that high school program. And more and more kids started coming to the high school program because I was in the first cohort that went through it. So what they've had to do at the University of Southern Mississippi is they've had to transition their curriculum to move their intro to GIS classes down to their 100 level from their 400 level and make them freshman level classes. And what's great about that is by forcing that shift to take place as a result of people having geospatial education coming into the university system, now, since those are freshman level classes, it's easier for a business person to take that as an elective. It's easier for a health person to take GIS as an elective and so on and so forth earlier on and start applying these principles as they move forward in their education in health or business or marketing or anywhere else. So what's kind of some of your thought processes around that, Joseph?
It grieves my geographic heart when a student in a secondary school, for example, gets really excited about GIS, that teacher that's the champion leaves, or that student goes to a different school and they don't have it. Now, there are things that they can do on their own, sure, but I think you're pointing to the value of having a good teacher, mentor, professor along the way to help guide you is so critical. So when that happens, there's this disjointedness, and it's not good. I think, though, on a positive note, there are some wonderful developments in education. I've been involved with that Geotech Center project with community colleges. So folks that are listening that aren't familiar with that, it was an attempt, and it still exists. It's in its 12th year or so, to get these community college instructors to talk to each other, to share ideas, curriculum, etc., and also some research in the effectiveness of GIS in education, but also to develop some model courses. What should we be including? We're not just going to teach like it was, you know that song Party Like It's 1999, David? But we don't want to teach like it's 1999, right?
That's right.
Anyway, the point is, let's keep moving forward with our curriculum. And many of these community college instructors, for example, are, as you are aware, they're sort of lone wolf GIS people. Like they are their own, they are the only GIS instructor at that college. Now there are many exceptions, but the idea then to bring these people together and move the entire GIS education platform forward, I think is something that is a significant achievement. You know, certainly the Learning to Think Spatially report from the National Research Council was a modest leap forward, where it got a lot of people thinking, hey, we need to be teaching this throughout the educational system. And you're a prime example of what can happen when a person actually, if not in grade school, at least in high school, starts going down this pathway. And not everybody will turn into a David, right? Not everybody will go into geospatial, but maybe they'll be like your colleague who's on the call here, Carrie Choles, where they'll be in business or health or some other field, and then they'll be in a role where they're now using geospatial as a part of their tool belt, like a tool on their tool belt, which, as you know, is starting to take root. Yeah, the GIS jobs are going to still modestly increase, but the ones that are even more rapidly increasing are in health, transportation, where you're not a full-time GIS analyst or a technician or something like that, but you are expected to use the geospatial technologies as part of your everyday or at least weekly work. And that's pretty exciting.
So I have two thoughts on that. And at a high level, the first one is I do some outreach through Kiwanis Club to their K-Kids program. And what I found is a lot of times geography is being removed from the earlier portions of K through 12. And it's actually falling back to librarians to do it a lot of times, is what I've run into. I went into several places. I don't know if it's just in Mississippi or what's going on around the country, because I'm just thinking on the U.S. education system here, is that, geography is being kind of hamstrung there. And a lot of times I've found that, like I said, I'll interact with the librarian, ends up being the person who's talking about geography, and I'll introduce them to different resources they have to be able to self-teach there. But before we jump into that second subject, which I have around my hiring practice and how it relates to geospatial, what are your thought processes on that K through 12 and what my data points are saying is kind of an eroding, particularly in that first, that kindergarten through fifth grade, of removing geospatial and geography from the education system?
Oh, heavens, we could have a whole different conversation about this, but over my time at the USGS, for example, which was from the Jurassic to the Holocene, a long period of time, I would work with educators, and over that time span, they would say, I'm able to do even a smaller part of what I did last year because of all the other pressures that I have in the educational system. So sure, there's been articles, as you know, about the challenges that geography and some other disciplines have faced. On the encouraging side, though, we're seeing a lot more use of spatial thinking, geotechnologies by people that are teaching history, math, STEM, etc. STEM has in itself lent a boost to what we are all about, you and I, because it is all about, let's investigate a real world problem, let's gather data, let's assess it, let's make a decision. Maybe we act on it in our community and actually go out there and change things for the better. Citizen science, service learning. Another point, you talked about Kiwanis, which I salute and acknowledge. 4-H and other after-school programs have really attached themselves, Scouts, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, to geospatial in some significant ways. I mean, you've been to the ESRI conference. Those blue-shirted students from 4-H, that's almost my favorite part of the conference. Is just talking to those people, and they're doing krieging and stuff, and they're 14 years old. They're just give you great hope for the future. Not to base it all on tools, but just the way they're thinking about their own making a difference in the world and their pathway, and they're just so inspiring. So I think that sure. So we're working with formal disciplines and educators in those disciplines in primary and secondary, and this is global. It's not just USA, but we're also working with after-school programs, libraries, museums, 4-H, Kiwanis, et cetera, like you were saying. So I think, and you know, that's working with teachers and students. We're also working with superintendents, state ed tech directors, social studies coordinators, science coordinators, and, you know, so national organizations. We're trying to, again, tap on all the windows and doors. We're doing it from the bottom up and from the top down, but it's not just us or you, it is the entire community. So anybody listening to this, I just encourage you, get involved with some educational institution, whether it's a community college, a university, a primary, a secondary school, an after-school club. See if you can make a contribution there.
Yeah, and that brought me to something else I was thinking about, which is kind of, you know, you've spoken about this one educator that makes a difference, you know, and I think that what we have to realize is it doesn't have to always be this monomyth of someone like dedicating themselves to, you know, like cultivating geospatial in a large group of people. If you can do outreach and reach out to, you know, 10 kids and one of them is legitimately interested, that level of impact, that return on investment as they echo through time is going to create huge gains for the impact that you have positively on the world and on the species. So if you can find, you'll find a lot in my nomenclature when I talk a lot about species level decisions and how we have to start making those. So that's a definite ball of wax over there. But whenever I'm making these decisions, a lot of times I think, like at our Center for Research Engineering, Gulfport High School, where I learned GIS, is literally 5 blocks that way. So the kids will walk down here after school, like at 3 p.m. school lets out and they're in high school. They'll come down, or even some of the seniors around lunch, and they'll come hang out at our Center for Research Engineering, and they'll do, you know, just kind of unpaid internship in a way. It's just kind of a place for them to hang out. Sometimes their parents will pick them up here and they'll go and see what we're working on or the clients we're working with and understand how they think of it as mapping, how maps are, you know, doing things. So, you know, just realize that if you can just take a couple of hours and interact, particularly whenever they're young, like when I go to like K Kids with Kiwanis Club and I go to like these like 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, they absolutely light up and shine when they start understanding, you know, that you can get paid to do mapping and you can start looking at the world, how they relate. I think a lot of times we are born with more spatial concepts and understanding, like intuitively, like the first law of geography, that everything's related, but closer things are more closely related than distant things. I think that we're aware of that. We start figuring that out. Like animals realize that. Humans realize that when we're young, but sometimes we add all these other layers of decision making in this kind of like process, and we start like stripping the spatial out because it's not being taught. And then there's also some real theories I have on disjointing geo from spatial, because there are things we can analyze spatially that are not geo. If we start examining time as distance and the 4th dimension as duration through a higher dimension, which is what really physicists look at it now. We can start looking at time spatially as a spatial concept of like you know, an infrastructure that we are traversing. These are real concepts. These are things that are being spoken of, things that are being thought about that I think we intuitively understand. And then we add so much noise on top of it that we start getting away from it. There's even things that are like, we call it just like our gut thinking, that are taken into context, geospatial analysis that we are doing intrinsically without realizing it's happening, you know? So that's some random stuff out there.
No, that's you're pulling together a lot of really good threads and ones that I personally believe in. And I think the chief one is, you know, again, thinking about those listening to this, we love the tools, you know, and we love spatial data, and we love being able to do things with the spatial data with the tools. But it really goes beyond that. In your work with even the local school is a great example. And as I've heard you talk about at different conferences as well, that it is really imperative that we embrace spatial and critical thinking in decision-making in society, right? In transportation, human health, agriculture, energy, water, et cetera. I mean, the planet is not going to wait around for us to get smarter about this. So we really need to, I mean, we all of us in this industry really have this sort of global earth ethic that we need to be doing this. It's not an option. And so that really drives us forward, doesn't it, on all of the things that we do in education and with other things with geospatial. And so when people come to an event like the one I talked to you at recently in Colorado, or the ESRI conference or AAG or any other sort of geospatial focused event, it's yeah, this actually matters, and this is why we're doing it. Yes, it's great if we can get paid doing it, and yes, it's great if we can, learn more things. But ultimately, it is to enable a better world. And I think even, those local high school students coming down, they get a sense of that, right? That you're not just doing this because, you're getting paid, and then at 5 o'clock you get to go home. No, it's you. In part, you and I and others in the industry, we'd be doing this in some capacity, even if we weren't getting paid to do it, right? It is really a part of our being.
So I'm going to say something that I know how much you love geography. And I'm going to say something that I want you to hear me out on. And it's going to initially sound combative. I think one of the best things to happen to the world is the weakening and destruction of geospatial, geographic concepts in a way. Because, and here's what I'm saying with that. I am no longer as closely tied to the first law of geography. It is no longer, I can impact just my community. I can set here in Mississippi, develop software that goes around the world and changes. We serve over 6,000 organizations globally. I travel a bit. I speak at conferences. I've never left the United States except for one time in my life. And I'm here helping multinational corporations, nonprofits, World Food Program, helping, UN-based organizations and all that. And, even 40 years ago, that was an impossibility, like not really an impossibility, but very, very improbable that a small organization of less than 20 people with people based in Tennessee and based in, Mississippi were going to be able to make this global impact. So this ability to be able to influence not that which is just closest to me in geographic proximity, but to have this global reach, I think that is something that is powerful and is new. And it's something I talk to the students about a lot, is you don't have to leave your community in order to make a global impact anymore. And not only that, you have access to global resources that you previously would not have. It's no longer just reading an encyclopedia. It's being able to go online and be able to learn these things, to be able to, for instance, you and I, you're in Colorado right now. I'm in Mississippi. We're exchanging these ideas in a way that will impact people around the world that listen to this podcast, and will impact them in different places and different times. If we were to look at, what our options were for sharing information a few decades ago, completely different. Now, the greatest teacher I've had is the internet. The greatest teacher I have had is YouTube. It was 2006 and someone turned to me and said, learn flex development. Sure, I went out and got a book, but in reality, it was looking at Mansour Rad's blogs is really where I got a lot of Mansour, it was going to the forums and learning from other people. We no longer have to find a master of the craft locally in order to be able to learn. We can reach out, build global relationships, and it's a two-way street where once we grow to that point, we can impact the world externally as well. So if anything, this weakening of the first law of geography is allowing for greater influence, both on ourselves and greater influence that we can externally have.
Well, a couple things, sir. I love this. That just as one example of what you're talking about, think of when a researcher, young, old, in between, makes a story map of their research. Sure, they can still publish in journals, and that's all good, and nothing taking away from that. But now they've got this global reach through the student from Canada, the right whales project. Why are right whales dying in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and what can we do about it? Having that global platform, it's really amazing, and it's just on the story map alone, there are over 1 million of them now. Just past that milestone 6 weeks ago, late 2019. Wow. And then the second thing is, just saluting your efforts. We have talked to countless universities where, just as one example, of them using your tools for the ArcGIS Online administrative tool set that you've got, that it has saved them not just agony and anguish, but thousands of hours of of hours that they can now do other things and not run administrative tools. They're using your your tools to help them to be more efficient. So I want to thank you for all the good things that you're developing, but also to tie in that, yeah, we've got this amazing platform at our fingertips that can, and just one more about that. When, for me, one of the moments that was, kind of stands out from this past decade is when Survey 123 was crowdsourced enabled. So now, the end person didn't have to be in your organizational account. They really didn't have to know much about GIS per se, but now they can collect data on your broken sidewalks in the community, or invasive species, or the weather, or water quality, or whatever. So now it's got this global platform that, just like globe.gov and iNaturalist and those communities, the ebird.org and so on. So you've got ordinary folks, that whole citizen science movement emerging, and it's been around for more than 100 years now, right? But now they're enabled to map, and not just map things, and I'm sure you say this to people all the time, it's not just putting points on a map, it is, do we understand it better, or in a richer way, or in a deeper way? And then what can we do about the invasive species, or the water quality, or the litter, or the broken sidewalks?
If you ever want to hear me scream about something, let's start talking about Kogon grass as an invasive species to the southeastern United States. But
you mentioned that in Denver, actually, in September.
Yeah, really big on that. And what the problem there is we're figuring out real great ways to track it, but not real great ways to do anything about it. So it's kind of frustrating where we're showing decision makers like, yeah, this is spreading, this is the rate of spreading is doing, it's following the interstate system. Because as man develops this interstate system, you're developing this perfect pathway for Kogon grass to follow. But that's a whole other thing. I do want to give a shout out to the team that is working on Survey 123, because they have technologically pushed so hard and done so much great stuff. Like they were the first team, to my knowledge, to really get Esri like thinking about and pushing on webhooks. And now we have that coming into ArcGIS Enterprise. And like, that's pivotal. Like that's allowing integration with other systems much stronger. I love the way they've taken some portions of an open platform, like I think it's like GeoODK, I think it's called, or something as such. Like that's something like the base there, and really, made that extremely accessible as part of like Esri's ecosystem. I think that that's really awesome. The more we can get people out there doing things like that. And what's great about it is I always have to tell people that it doesn't have to be a map to be spatial. And I love that Survey 123 isn't a map, but it's spatial. It can go back and hydrate an operations dashboard. It can go back and, hydrate into these other information products, So
hydrate, that's a good word, hydrate. I might have to use that in the future. But you're right, the way that these tools are connected, so you create a survey on, I've got one on walkability, and then I've got a story map that explains it, and then I've got the results of what I've got in my global walkability. Is your community walkable? And if so, how? And if not, why not? And then I've got the operations dashboard. Yeah, just the idea is how these tools are connected is so powerful. They're powerful on their own, but when they're connected, oh my gosh, we can do great things. Even simple things like, how walkable is your community? Or where's the invasive species in your community? Plant, animal, etc. I'm right with you.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you something about hydrate also. If you like that word, you'll be tickled by this. The place I picked up that little piece of nomenclature was at the Esri office in Denver, was in Colorado. And it was a guy named Andy Hendrickson, I believe. Remember Andy from back in the day by any chance? He was real big on ArcGIS Online being a folderless structure with tags and all kinds of stuff, which I have strong philosophy debates on the introduction of folders to ArcGIS Online versus it being a completely indexed system by tags. Strong opinions on that. If anyone ever wants to have a strong debate on that, try to convince me that introducing folders was the right idea to simplify things, then you and I can happily talk about that. Anyone out there in the internet world that wants to reach out, please come talk to me about folders. We can have a deep discussion on folders versus tags. ArcGIS Online, and it's one of the quotes that I had in an Esri blog last year, where I was rambling, as I want to do, as you can tell. I was rambling at a UC, and one of the things I said is that ArcGIS Online is the greatest repository of global geospatial information in the history of the species. And I meant it. Now, what the part of the quote that got cut off at the end and was not included is, and we're not doing enough with it. So I can imagine why on the Esri blog, perhaps that last part was taken off. But I think with the introduction of data science more seriously being introduced into our geospatial toolbox, and more data scientists coming to us and realizing this wealth of data we've been sitting on, where a lot of the data scientists are a lot more hungry for data. They have the tools, they have the knowledge, they have the, they have all this great stuff. They don't have this well curated data that we're just sitting on, I think that perhaps is what tempers that second part of the quote with, and we're not doing enough about it, is the fact that we are seeing a more of an influx of data scientists, and they're becoming aware of us, and we're becoming aware of them and their techniques, and we're seeing this wonderful kind of marriage of professions take place. And I know that that's a hotly debated subject right now, is the data scientist term. So,
well, it's a competitive world in higher education, as you know. In part, I understand. Okay, we've got to rebrand, we've got to recraft. One might argue that geospatial has been about data science since before data science was even a term, right? And we've always been about big data before big data was a term. And so some of this is, one might argue a sort of a recrafting of what they already have. But on the other hand, I salute their efforts, and we are actively working with those data science emerging data science programs in universities, saying, hey, don't forget about the G part of data science. There is a geospatial part, and just don't, as you form your programs, don't leave that part behind or think, oh, it's only in the geography department across campus or whatever. And speaking of which, your point about the way that the world has worked in terms of the technology and geography, there were probably half a dozen articles, as you may recall, in the late 90s about the death of geography, and even whole books, I think, written about this. And in some ways, it is grand to be able to have these tools and this platform to be able to impact your community, but also the world with the same set of technologies. On the other hand, with the issues and the problems that you and I have been talking about, water, energy, invasive species, et cetera, geography does matter, and things have patterns, relationships, and trends. Interestingly, what I get a lot from students is, hey, Joseph, I've mapped and studied this particular set of variables, and there's no spatial pattern. And the implication is that therefore the analysis is no good. And I say, well, it's valid. If there's no spatial pattern, that's interesting as well. It doesn't always have to have a spatial pattern. And maybe, like you're saying, David, getting them to think more broadly about the value of analysis. It doesn't always have to result in a map or an understandable geographic relationship trend, et cetera. It can still be a valid contribution to science.
So let's talk about spatial versus geography. So here's something here. We oftentimes marry them as if they were conjoined twins, but in reality, I believe we can divorce the two. I am very big into the idea of understanding the patterns of our world, not just by applying spatial to geography, but using spatial as a metaphor in order to better understand complex topics. So if we were to take represent our Z and our X and Y axis as, investment of money versus cash flow, like what's happening, what's cash in, what's cash out, and then taking our Z and making that time and looking at that as a time-space cube of what's happening with it. I think that in reality, what we can do is take some concepts that we've refined very, very well in spatial analysis for interpolation, and now go and take those and apply those to statistical interpolation instead, and examining time as space and our variables as our other axes. We start to be able to communicate patterns, because it was like I was talking about earlier, where as we get older, we start to get rid of some of our intrinsic understanding of the spatial analysis of what's happening, things that we just understood as part of survival, But if we go and we examine something in a way that we present it in a spatial way, even if it's not a geographic concept, if we take these non-geographic concepts and show them in a spatial way, there's so much value to that, because people begin to intuitively understand it. And there's the old saying of, a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a map's worth 1,000,000, So that's where I think if we can take that and stop putting ourselves in the box of thinking that it's got to be a map, and stop putting ourselves in the box of thinking that even if we were to examine something spatially, that it must always be the real world space. Let us go and take things which are more complex and have relationships and examine those relationships through saying that not necessarily everything is related to everything, but closer things are more closely related to distant things, but instead say concepts instead of things. And instead of thinking about it as geospatial space, just think of it as space instead of geospatial space. So that's some things that I apply even to the way that I approach life and the way that I approach my understanding of this universe that I'm contained in at this time, and perhaps it would help the listeners to understand that my areas of study from college are geography and geology, computer science, applied mathematics, and comparative religion. So you're hearing a very strange mixture, perhaps, of ideas and terms here that are a result of that kind of stone soup of education. So.
Oh, I love it, sir. And that speaks to what's exciting to, I think, all of us now in the world of geospatial technology, and that is we've got this expanding, diversity of perspectives, backgrounds from people. We've got people in here now from business and sociology and philosophy and art and other disciplines that are really lending a lot of richness to not just the discussions, but what problems do we tackle? How do we tackle those problems? And so I think it's a really exciting time. Sure, the tools and the data are wonderful, and I'm going to note about that in a moment, but the people in it have always been, right, the things that have been most attractive to people. You almost never meet someone who's, I was in the world of GIS, geospatial, geotechnology for a while, and I didn't like it, so I got out of it. That almost never happens. I mean, it's not like the Hotel California where you can't ever check out. You know what I mean? It's not like that. But and we've had people leave Esri, for example, but they almost always go into something related, like they're going to start a solar energy company, or they're doing something geo focused. Another thing, though, that I wanted to mention related to what you were saying is that, right, I think we would benefit by an increased collaboration with the cognitive scientists. Sure, there's one might think, they're spatial and we're geospatial, but there's a lot of overlap, as you're alluding to. And there's a group, for example, at Northwestern University with David Uttal and others that are doing some really good work that are kind of trying to bridge the gap. I'd like, if there is a gap, I'm not sure if there is, but I'd love to clone them somehow and get that kind of a group in other universities where we have this cognitive science, geography, geospatial conversation at least. And then the other thing that you're talking about, which I totally agree with, is I think about like a flowing data blog and some of these they're visualizations. Sometimes there's maps in there and oftentimes there isn't. And so I've just designed this course at North Park University that I just finished teaching called Cartography and Geovisualization.
Nice.
And I had the students actually look at a lot of things that weren't maps. And some of the comments that I've just recently read about the course as we're wrapping it up is, my view of this has greatly expanded because we're not just looking at a choropleth map of neighborhoods in Chicago, which I actually had them look at, but beyond that.
Yes. Yeah. Geovisualization, you hit it right there. I mean, there's these words that are getting popular in the Esri ecosystem. We talk about a systems-based approach of like the system of record, the system of engagement, and the system of analysis, where we're trying to understand things. And that system of engagement is really important. I think we're entering we're in the data age. There's so much data. And what's really important is to be able to take that data and turn it into information. And the way you're talking about geovisualization and arming those people going into the workforce, those individuals, to have those tools and be able to reach back on them, this ability to visualize and take these complex data sets and make it so a human can digest it's extremely important. But at the same time, this is where there's also the argument of should it be the job of the human to digest it? Or should it be the job of the machine to digest it and the human just to help guide the machine? We're entering a time period where the volume of data is greater than our ability for our biological mind to be able to comprehend it. So what are we going to do about that? And that's where we're seeing the rise of neural networks. That's where we're seeing the rise of machine learning. But what is sometimes lost by decision makers is the lack of understanding that even when something comes out of that, it must be vetted. And even when something comes out of that must be vetted, it must be presented in a way that makes sense. So I think the ability to be able to tell the story and to be able to visualize it and put it in context. Give it context is what matters. Whenever I say that, I'm just going to make up a statistic here, which, most people make up statistics. So we're a dishonest species. So I'm going to make up statistics here. Let's just say that I'll tell you that 300,000 ice cream cones are going to be sold next year, but that's down from 500,000 the year before. Now, what if I were to tell you, we go back one more step and say 300,000 was the norm for the year before that, and the whole decade, and the 500,000 was a spike that happened in the middle. I could, depending on when I choose to cut that story, I can make it doom and gloom, or I can make it that last year was awesome. That goes back to a saying of, the secret to a happy story is knowing when to roll the credits, right? So because it all changes over time. So there's a danger in allowing the machine simply to tell you, there's been, this standard deviation and change in a stat. Throw the alarms, panic. There's a danger to that without there being the human component to be able to understand it. And what I fear sometimes is that we are not appropriately armed as a group for survival to be able to interpret what's going to come next. So there's always that idea also, Esri's real good at catchphrases. What's next is something that was recently, or what's coming next was recently a big slogan there. So, I think that, and see what others can't, right? That's another good one. So I think that we need to be able to arm ourselves, not just the geospatial sciences, but also doctors, need to be able to understand what are they going to do whenever machines are talking so much about your health and analyzing all this health data. How do they create a correct narrative around that without having these sudden panics? Our business people, how are they going to run our economies now that it used to be you didn't know what the average sales was for some small neighborhood in the middle of Iowa on like a random Tuesday. Now you can grab that data and figure that out. So what does it mean to be an economist all of a sudden? Like, you have to be able to tell the story. You have to be able to create the narrative, and you have to be able to kind of chop through the noise to see the overall pattern. And I think as geospatial scientists, as you said, we've been doing big data for a long time. Maybe not what is modern big data. We've been taking large data sets, interacting with them, and having to chop through noise and be able to create a consistent narrative. I think that that skill set, that hard-earned skill set that a lot of us have in the geospatial world of creating that consistent narrative, is going to be important to be able to understand this mass amount of data in the data age. And I kind of hate when people call it the information age, because it's really the data age a lot of times, because there's just a whole bunch of data and a whole bunch of information and misinformation. You can go find an enclave community that believes whatever you want 24/7, but in reality, it's how are you going to tell a truthful narrative that makes sense and can be digested and consumed? So
yeah, very good points. That's one of the reasons why I have that, it sounds super boring, David, but that GIS and public domain data book and my spatial reserves data blog, because I want people to understand that, as you well know, and I want other people to know, maps are very powerful and they need to be treated with respect. And you, me, everybody now is a map creator. We're not just consumers of data. We can create spatial data. And platforms like ArcGIS Online are open. There's no SRE data police saying you can't put that data up. It is a completely open platform. So how do you, not just with that one, but other data portals as well, how do you then, can I trust that data? Well, how often was it updated? The standard metadata stuff is really relevant more now than ever before. I'm pulling data, and in 60 seconds, I could have a really compelling looking map, right? In ArcGIS Online or in other platforms. But do I know where all that data came from? No, if I don't know where it came from, I better find out. And so to your point that, we need to be critical consumers of data. But another thing I like about what you're saying is that, thinking about moving forward in the profession and in the industry, if you've got a video of your community, and from that video, AI and ML can detect every light pole, shrub, curb condition, everything, then what entry-level, if we can call it that, entry-level GIS people will do in the future will radically change, right? They won't have to be digitizing parcels and maintaining that. It'll be
it's already gone, man.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're learning to be a technician and you're in college, I'm sorry, you're being taught something that doesn't exist anymore. That's not going to cut it. You're going to have to, the technician jobs, those have been gone. back in the early 2000s, like, the 2005 to 2008, if you go to GIS Jobs Clearinghouse and you look at that and you got out of college and you're trying to get a job without knowing some web development, good luck. And they would call it a GIS analyst position. And they would want you to be able to still have the skill sets of a technician. They'd want you to have analytical skills, and they would want you to be a GIS developer, all rolled in one. And then you have to understand databases, part of it, understand the client server model, all kinds of architecture, things that are going on technologically there. If anything, I would say the technician job's been dead since like really that kind of mid 2000 range. The other reason, it's a great thing though. Thank God that it's dead. Because if you have a geospatial mind and all you're gonna do is heads up digitize all day, you might as well, that's terrible. So here's the thing. We talked about survey 1, 2, 3, we talked about, collector, we talked about all these things that people who are using like an Esri ecosystem and even a lot of the open systems have the ability to empower the average person to go in and create data. So why should a geospatial person back in the office be the one that's digitizing something related to a water system when there's a guy who works on that water system's worked on it for 30 years, knows everything about it? That should be the person putting that data in. And the role of the geospatial person in that organization needs to be the advocate to empower that person and teach that person how to do that. And what you're going to run into and what you really need to do is learn these soft skills. If you're in college right now and you're listening to this, like, I hate to say it because I know we're on an educational one, but in reality, what you're not going to be taught most of the time, 9 out of 10 times, is that those soft skills is what's going to matter for what's going to happen. That's what's going to, determine the level of adoptions that happen in your organization. When I talk about soft skills, I talk about being able to bring someone to your point of view or being able to let someone believe that by them doing this, it's going to make their job easier and their life better. And a lot of that's about not going as, oh, I understand GIS and there's all this great, math behind it, databases and all this complex stuff. It's going, hey, what's your problem? How can I help? It's learning to ask questions instead of just make statements. You have to be able to go to those other people in the organization and ask questions and listen to them. It's about being a listener, not just a speaker with them. Determine what their needs are, do that needs analysis, and then be able to go back to them and say, I heard that you were complaining about X, Y, and Z. Here's tools A, B, and C that solve X, Y, and Z, and I'll sit down with you and I'll show you how to do that. And not being condescending when you do it, sitting with them, teaching them how to do it. And then what's going to happen is they're going to hydrate better data into your system. And then you're going to be able to build, since that system of record's better, you're going to be able to build a better system of engagement for decision makers is what's going to happen. And that's how you're going to get it through the organization. But if all you're learning is points, lines, and polygons, I'm sorry, you're not being armed with the right tools to do it. Go take some sociology classes, take some psychology classes. Like you want to be better at spreading geography, go listen to the social sciences and see what they're going to tell you about communication. The best book I ever got out of college was actually a business communication book. And I've shared that with so many people. All my directors read it. A lot of people in the organization read it. And it's about learning people's communication styles and how to approach them. I think that is vital. If you're going to go into the geospatial field, you're either going to have to become a lot more technical or you're going to have to become that advocate. You're going to have to take that advocacy position and run with it in your organization. So,
and on a related note, telling people, have your elevator speech,
yes.
To your point though of listening is more important, but also be prepared if someone says, well, why should we hire you? We've got Google Maps. Okay, why what you bring matters, and not just the technical things, but like you said, the other skills involved. So you might get like you being chief operating officer, you might get 30 seconds with your chief operating officer in the stairwell. Okay, be prepared. You might get 3 minutes with your board of directors, etc. So having that in mind, I work with environmental education, environmental science students in universities quite often. And I say, it's great that you care about the environment. I do, and hopefully we all do. But guess what? No one's going to pay you to care about the environment. What skills are you going to bring to EPA, to the Nature Conservancy, to United Nations Environment Program, et cetera, that are going to make them say, we need to have you in our organization? Those are the kinds of things, that I always try to,
Passion is fuel. It's like gasoline. But what good does gasoline give you without a car? which is what the skills are. I see plenty of people walking around just carrying this gasoline, thinking they're doing something great. And I'm like, what car are you going to put that in? What are you bringing to the table? How are you going to get from point A to point B? Because all that passion's going to do, and honestly, if you don't have the skills to do something with it, it's like strapping gasoline to your back and going on a long hike. You're not going to make it. So, but if you take that and you put it in a car, the skills, and you drive from A to B, it's going to work. And if you have all the skills without the passion, you're going to go nowhere. Also, you're going to be a bitter, burnt up person within a couple of years. You're going to get into it thinking, hey, I'm going to make some money doing this. I got the skills and everything. And those are the ones that I see that don't make it. No passion and all skill never makes it, and all passion and no skill never makes it. So it's, you got to be able to combine the two. Stop looking stupid out there. Like, go, like think this out. Like use our brains here. Find a way to make it impact the bottom line. Because what you have to do, it goes back to the example. You have to find what the other person cares about, and you have to make it about what they care about, right? So like, I'm not going to be able to convince someone that in a megacorp that they need geospatial sciences. Like it can't be, you need GIS for the sake of GIS. But what's going to be is, do you know where all of your assets are? What kind of liability do you have right now on that? Do you know if do you have to buy new assets? What's the age of your assets? When's the next time that you're going to have an actual kind of drop dead date on this infrastructure that was built? What's the cost going to be? You know what your cost is in 10 years? And really a lot of times decisions can be made quarter to quarter. So if you figure out a way to bring up that quarterly profit by doing something that is geospatial, you get what you want, they get what they want, you achieve Nash equilibrium, game theory says you're good, that's what you have to do. So, but don't just go there and say you need GIS because GIS is cool or for the sake of GIS. We're not going to, sadly, we're so greedy and short-sighted. We're not going to save the planet by saying we should save the planet. We're going to save the planet by saying we can save the dollars. That's what's going to happen. So,
well, you're the embodiment of a lifelong learner. You touched on the ability to change. And think outside the box. I was reading this book about a year ago. Perhaps you've read it as well. It's called Never Lost Again. It's about the morphing of Keyhole Earth Viewer to Google Maps. So one of the interesting stories in there was after first of all, they were in a board meeting. Hey, Google is going to buy us. Google, they don't do maps. They do now. Yep. That was one of the interesting moments. And the other one was in terms of thinking outside the box. So they went to Digital Globe up here in Colorado near me and said, okay, how much is it going to cost for, buying imagery for 100 cities around the world? And they came back with a couple $1 million price. They came back to the Google team at California and they said, it's going to be $3 million to buy 100 cities. And the Google team looked at the people that had just done the investigation that took a month and said, well, why don't we just buy the whole planet? So the point is, don't be afraid to think big, outside the box. Yeah. Now, sure, you and I and probably most people listening aren't going to have infinite amounts of cash or resources at their fingertips, but
argue your own limitations.
2020s, right? Think boldly. We've got some really serious issues on the planet, and it's going to take, as you're hinting at, a lot of us working collaboratively in new ways in this decade. So, being sensitive to your time, David, I just wanted to ask you, what do you think we need to be working on in this decade? What comes to mind to you that this is really key as a profession we need to be? Now, profession is expanding as we talked about, but what should we really be focusing on and tackling?
So I believe two things, and it's somewhat controversial, but I believe that if we are to survive as a species, the primary thing we must do is manage rate of human reproduction in one way or another by creating an incentivized ecosystem where we can live in a better balance, which we're planning that out in a lot of nations. But what we have to do is, I've even seen it in Mississippi, where I have lived through a time of economic change. And by creating a stronger economic area, we create stronger education, and we create a more stable rate of reproduction, which creates better environmental equilibrium. I believe one of the things that we must do is figure out how to increase economy, to increase education, to stabilize rates of reproduction. Otherwise, it's with any population, it will continue to expand its consumption of resources to the point to where its environment can no longer support it. So if there's anything we can do, we must be able to increase economy, to increase education, to stabilize reproduction. Those are the things that must happen. And one of the things that you kind of said there that struck with me is the fact that I am from an interesting place for not the, no one told me that I was going to be able to run a very large tech company that has a global influence from South Mississippi. No one said that. No one really thought that was possible. A lot of people looked at me like I was insane whenever I tried to do this. Our company headquarters is Nashville. Our Center for Research Engineering is in Biloxi. I hire people here. I'm one of the largest tech hiring groups in the area. And if people were to argue limitations with me most of the time, like when you said, you and I aren't going to have the resources necessarily to, make these like multi-million dollars. That's why I said, argue your own limitations. This morning, I was talking to my director of operations for what my Senate campaign is going to look like one day, because that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build a technological empire from Mississippi, and no one's going to get in my way. That's what's going to happen. And as part of that, I have this vision and I have these goals and I have these ideas in mind for how I can influence global decisions, how I can influence the species, and all the steps that go in between. I have went from, I'm the first person in my family to ever graduate from high school, not college, high school. My parents, my mom got her GED eventually. My dad dropped out, never got his GED. He made it to the 7th grade. And then here I am with all of my different, academic background of what I have acquired over time. I'm building this stuff, I'm hiring people. And what I've found a lot of times is when we no longer argue our limitations at all, but whenever we go for our grandiose plans and we push really, really hard for them, that other people around us become empowered all of a sudden. And one thing I didn't touch on is when I hire people, a lot of people I hire don't have geospatial backgrounds. Heck, half the people I hire don't have a college degree. And they end up working with these major megacorps and doing all this stuff, all from here, without necessarily having that background, because we have this giant vision that we're pushing towards. And I think that one of the things that really resonates for me about Esri and about Jack Dangerman and Laura Dangerman and their history and looking at like all the people from back in the day, is whenever they founded everything in 1969, there was a great vision. And they built the tools to try and get them there with their great vision. And then the tools became even more popular than the great vision. And now they're circling back to the great vision. It's always been there a little bit, but now you see with some of the stuff that the Dangermans are doing globally, you see like now they're really empowering themselves to be able to do that. But if we would have said the same thing about a young Jack Dangerman in Redlands, California, sitting there, who's now a multi-billionaire by net worth, I mean, no one would have thought that Redlands, California was
you can't run a company from this little town or
exactly.
Southern Mississippi.
That's right. It's the same thing. And that's the story. That's the narrative. That's what we have to go for, is making that global change, doing something great and not arguing our limitations, but being realistic in how we approach our strategies and our smaller term tactics. Take those micro tactics to create those larger macro strategies to create this ripple effect. And what you have to do is you have to build a team around you, because you're not going to do it yourself. Build that team. It's about the team, not the individual. It's like the old African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So go far together. Let's band together. Let's build our enclave groups. That is our team, so that we can make these changes. You have to be able to do it.
Well, when I saw Jack, I'd see him like once a year when I worked at Census, NOAA, and USGS, and he would, this would be like in a stairwell or an elevator, some hallway at some conference center somewhere. He'd go, "Joseph from USGS." And I'm thinking to myself, how does he remember me with the thousands of people he's met since the last time he saw me? But to your point about building a team, because he can say he's very good at remembering who you are and where you work. So you need to get together with you, because you two could do great things together. And that, by connecting people and forming these teams, same with you guys. I mean, when I was at UNA University of North Alabama, for the folks listening, about a year ago, was the alumni geography conference, and Neil Job came, and he was so inspiring. Yes, it was so wonderful, because the students that were still in attendance there, like, and you graduated from here and you have how many employees and you're doing X number of projects? That's incredible. So that seeing those examples, I think, are really inspiring, and I really salute all of the things that you folks are doing. And we could chat more, but being sensitive to your time, do you want to end with, do you have a favorite map or a data set that you want to highlight for the listeners here? I mean, we all have our sort of favorite books, maps, or maybe a favorite mentor that you've had in the past.
So I have a favorite book is what I'm going to go with, which is Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. So are you familiar with that, Joseph?
No.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. I cannot recommend it enough. If you want to read a book that will change your life, read The Alchemist. It is literally a strong part of the philosophy that I live my life by, and how I've been able to make so much change of coming from a economically disadvantaged position to where I am today, and particularly growing up in a primarily minority neighborhood. Is The Alchemist is really big. I recommend it to everyone that I can. Is read The Alchemist. Also, probably some Richard Bach, Jonathan Livingston Seagull and Illusions, that kind of stuff. So, I think all of that's strong, but seriously, The Alchemist, can't recommend it enough. So
I appreciate it. When I wrote that book on the 100 revolutionary discoveries in geography, almost every single person in there that I highlighted, and it's not just about people, but they're all avid readers.
Yes.
So I always encourage folks, read in a wide variety of topics, not just your own interested subject. And then also when you're at an event, go outside the box and go to a track that is completely outside of your own field of knowledge.
Yes.
And you might learn something. So at a recent AAG, American Association of Geographers conference, I went to a social work thread for a whole morning. And I learned something about the techniques that they use, about their methodology. It was just eye-opening. It was grand. So, yeah, I like what you're saying, and I appreciate the time that you've spent here, David. You are one of my inspirations, and I hope that we can continue the discussion. And I wish you all success in your work, your personal life, all the big dreams and goals that you've got. This is a new decade, and I'm looking forward to working with you in the future. I just wish you all the best.
Well, thank you for having me on, and thank you for everything that you do as an advocate. There's your name's big out there, and you do a lot of stuff to make sure that the ball's moving in the right direction. So thank you.
Thanks, but we're all in this together. Team effort is exactly what you were saying.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. See you, Joseph.